We have probably positive net employment effects by the energy transition. But of course, we also have different effects on different sectors, between regions, between qualifications, between men and women. And well, this graph also shows the need for training, reskilling, upskilling, to use the job creation potential and to be able to reallocate those people within jobs that are at risk. So this transition needs to be managed, which leads me to well, the term of just transition, which is a term well originally pushed forward by unions, as you might know, but has been well broadly taken up by, for example, the ILO. It's mentioned in the Paris Agreement. The UN 2030 agenda doesn't mention well explicitly well just transition, but it has this notion of leaving no one behind, which is closely well interrelated to the or well closely connected to the just transition discourse. And of course, the well sustainability development goals are well also kind of well just transition goals. We have the European Green Deal, which aims for a just transition. We have seen over the last 1 or 2 years the upcoming of just energy transition partnerships, and of course many more declarations by national governments and stakeholders. And I think it's important to see that there are broader and more narrow understandings of just transition. Well, I didn't put a super narrow definition here, but you know, the more narrow definitions really focus on jobs, or perhaps even more well narrowly on coal or fossil fuel jobs, while more broader definitions like the one from well South Africa, from the well multi-stakeholder presidential climate commission there, which I put just a small part of a very long definition. Here will also includes issues like social inclusion and poverty, and will also combines the just transition term with issues of climate justice, so of well the unequal effects from climate change, and also well issues from procedural justice, public participation, well, and more, which leads me to the next slide. So, well, independent of the issue you look at and how broad or how narrow your issue is you look at, I think it's important to recognize different justice dimensions. So, well, probably the most prominent one is distributional justice, so well about the distribution of benefits and burdens, or benefits and costs. But there's also the issue of procedural justice, so the inclusive access to decision making. And there's what's called recognitional justice, which is about recognition of everyone's well equal dignity, of people's well worldviews, and also of their well different knowledges and skills in this context. And well, for all these issues, you can analyze well inequalities in several dimensions. So in well socio-structural dimensions, so you can look at well inequalities between gender, age, well different ages, income levels, education levels, ethnicity, and so on. And then you can look at well inequalities from a spatial perspective, so between different regions, or between urban and the rural, or between the global north and south, and you can look at them from a temporal perspective, well current and future generations, or well perhaps also looking at past injustices, and so then well coming now to dual VET. So what are well issues then perhaps for dual VET at this well nexus of both just and green? And of course the most prominent issue probably is well to keep people in decent employment with the help of well also of dual VET. So by supporting green skills in both new and established sectors, by reskilling workers in sectors that are potentially negatively affected by the transition, and within that to consider the potentially different needs of men and women, of young and old, of marginalized groups and the informal sectors between different regions, well, and not only needs, but perhaps also the different capacities and competencies. But there are, well, also further, issues, I guess. So making the dVET system itself green and just. So I'm not an expert in dual VAT, but my impression was there is a long-standing debate on green campus. I'm not so sure whether the same is true on, well, let's call it just campus or just dVET. So, well, issues of, well, equal recognition, representation, non-discrimination of different population groups within the dVET system. There's also the issue of, well, making the dVET system and curricula more responsive and agile towards fast technological change and uncertainties within that transition. So the question of transversal skills, for example, and I mean, dual VAT might be particularly well suited to be responsive by its close involvement of the private sector, which leads me to the next point of social dialogue and, well, public stakeholder participation as one dimension of, well, a just dVET system. And, well, on the global level, you know, the North-South dimension to have, or, well, how to have the climate development finance for dual VAT and to have some support for the global South. And there might be more, well, issues that come to your mind, and I'm, well, looking forward to well, all your contributions from the panelists, but, well, from all of you participating here on where this is my last slide, where we just put our guiding questions for this BarCamp and the whole BarCamp series. So what are important linkages between dual VAT and the just green transition? How can dual VAT fuel a just green transition? What are specific opportunities with regard to the dual VAT, so like private sector, well, integration? What is key to ensure that dVET can play its part in a just green transition? And what are the implications for development cooperation? So that was from my side, and I'm very much looking forward to the next 2 hours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dirk, for this very comprehensive overview, in particular also bringing us from the just transition aspects, the different parameters around, then also to the nexus with dual VAT. That's why we are here, to really understand. And super, that was really a very, very great input. I just saw also in the chat that there is an additional source from the ILO on greening dVET. So yeah, please, you can find also more information what the ILO is done. And yeah, the Öko-Institut, we have also just shared the link to the Öko-Institut here. Yeah, I think with this really profound background, this has now shaped the frame for our following panel discussion. Yes, we are really looking forward to and are very grateful for our 4 panelists who made the time today to join and share their perspectives. Yeah, we're very happy to have a really gender balanced panel today, 2 women, 2 men across the globe. We have Indonesia here, South Africa, and then yes, Europe, Germany, and also an international perspective. Birte Ifang from BMZ. She's a senior policy officer for dVET at BMZ, based in Bonn, in Germany. Thanks, Birte, for being with us. We have Ruly Marianti from Indonesia. She's the principal advisor of the GIZ Inclusive Sustainable Economic Development Project in Indonesia, and she will give us a bit of some insights and highlights with regard to the implementation perspective on this whole topic. And then, of course, we are super happy to have the civil society here. On the one hand, the private sector, Anthony Gewer from South Africa. He is the program manager for social transformation at the National Business Initiative. That's really very interesting to hear really what does the private sector expect and what is the role maybe also of the private sector in this discussion. And then also last but not least, Mark Hagen from the Just Transition Center at ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederations. He's the policy advisor there since I think more than 25 years. So that gives really a good background. We have different perspectives here that we can hear. And yeah, I would then like to hand over again to you, Dirk, for the panel discussion with our 4 panelists here. I hand over to you then.
Yes, well, thank you, Christina. Thank to all the panelists for joining from my side. So with the panelists, within this discussion, we now want to discuss what they think is key to ensure that dVET can play its part for a just green transition. What are the challenges and opportunities? Where do they see the main contribution of their organization? What type of organization? And what do they expect from others? If all of you participating have a question to the panelists, you can write it in the chat, and please indicate to whom your question is addressed. And I might pick up your question in the second round we do. If I don't do it because of the time constraints of 40 minutes, you can surely bring it again in the following breakout sessions. So we just jump in, and I would like to start with Birte Ifang from the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Birte, what is your ministry understand by just transition, and what are the concrete implications and the priorities for your work on dVET?
Yes, thank you, Dirk, and hello to everyone from my side. Well, our ministry, the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, has made just transition a priority of our work. So our aim is a green transition of the economy and the society, and to make this transition process also socially just. We believe that transition will only be successful if it includes emerging economies and developing countries. So no talking about them without them. And this transition must be designed in a way that is socially just for all. So this is really the core idea that we follow with our priorities on just transition. As you might know, also we pursue a feminist development policy in Germany. So therefore, we pay special attention to gender equality and to vulnerable groups. So yes, we are very aware of the different justice dimensions that you just mentioned, Dirk. And we already heard from your presentation that the transition comes with risks such as job losses, price increases, growing resource demands, etc. And this, of course, is a challenge for every country, but in particular for developing countries, for our partner countries. And we see that wealthier nations have a responsibility to support developing countries as they undertake this necessary restructuring for a just transition. And that's why Germany and BMZ are aware of this responsibility, and we want to be a dependable source of support for our partner countries. Our ambition is that no one should be left behind on the path towards climate neutrality. And to assure social cohesion and prosperity, we need to create decent green jobs, as you also just pointed out in your presentation. And for us at BMZ, this is a central pillar in a just transition, to create decent green jobs. We mentioned this also in our agenda for decent work worldwide, and in our new core theme strategy on sustainable economic development, training and employment. So the creation of decent green jobs is really embedded also in our strategic frameworks on the policy level. But yeah, now I come to TVET and dVET, because we also need qualified workers to fill these jobs. Because in the end, without them, no electric car will be maintained and no solar power system will be installed, We need all the workers to fill the jobs and to make the just transition happen. And that is why we see dVET as a catalyst for change. And we also have dVET as one of our priorities in German development cooperation, because we see the important role of dVET for a just transition. So we really welcome the opportunity to exchange today on the role of dual VET and just transition, because this is really such an important part of our work also at BMZ. As many of you might know, we have a very long-standing experience in supporting dVET worldwide, with a special focus on the promotion of dual VET approaches and a strong focus on public-private partnerships, as well as on social dialogue. And I think especially all these aspects are very important also in a just transition. So VET is at the core of a successful just transition from our point of view, both as an enabler of the transition and also as a driver of the transition. As I said, we need qualified workers at all levels, and we must provide them with up-to-date skills and knowledge. You also mentioned in your presentation already, Dirk, that we need, of course, initial training, but we also need lots of reskilling and upskilling to make sure that the transition processes can be socially just and no one will be left behind. To achieve this change, we rely, of course, on our big bilateral portfolio in dVET, but also on multilateral cooperation. For example, we cooperate with the UN, the EU, and also among the G7. For example, last year, Germany had the G7 presidency, and we pushed for a clear commitment by the G7 to strengthen green jobs and skills. And we were very happy that last year the G7 have adopted this goal, and they have committed to increase the share of their ODA for green skills and green jobs by 2025. So this is a goal of the G7, but of course then also for us at BMZ to really work to adapt our portfolio to strengthen green skills and green jobs. So yes, so much maybe as a short overview from the policy side, what we do in the ministry. There's still a lot of work, of course, to meet the challenges and opportunities that the green transition brings. And yeah, I look forward to discussing this more in depth with you.
Thank you very much, Birte, for this first insight from BMZ. We agreed with the panelists to have a first round of opening statements from each before asking further questions. So this is why I now turn to the next panelist, which is Anthony Gewer from the National Business Initiative in South Africa. Anthony, we talked about sectors at risks and reskilling. So what are your experiences with regard to some of these key sectors that are, well, at risk or will undergo deep change in the green transition? What role can reskilling and green skills play, and what experiences perhaps do you have with skill developments, well, institutions and their potential role?
Thank you. Thanks, Dirk. So thank you, everyone. The organization I work with is National Business Initiative. It's a non-profit organization, but it's a business-based, private sector-based organization. We have close to 100 member companies, which are many of our large companies across many of the key sectors of our economy. And we've been around since the dawn of democracy in South Africa, and around 1995. I think, and why I'm sketching that context is to understand the kind of lens that we take on the challenge, because I think the key thing is how to get the private sector to play a key role in socioeconomic transformation. And you will all know how deeply set or embedded issues of poverty, unemployment, and inequality are in our economy and in our labor market. And what the NBI tries to do is to make sure that the private sector can play a more transformative role in addressing some of these challenges. In the organization, we have two units that work side by side amongst other units, but the key one is our environment unit, which looks very much at climate change and looks at issues around water and energy and other sorts of, and particularly around the just transition has been driving a lot of that work in the country. And the unit which I work in, which is actually economic inclusion, so my title has changed somewhat, Christine. So I'm a senior program manager within the economic inclusion unit, and we focus very much on the issues of employability and inclusion, right? Particularly amongst youth, but more broadly than that. And I think where these two things come together is the nub of what you're asking, because on the one hand, there's issues around what does it take to achieve a just transition broadly? You know, what are the various elements and what are the sectors that are at risk? And I'll talk about that. But the second component, which is where we are very much concerned, is how to make sure that as we undergo that transition, that it is inclusive, that it is just. Right? And often these two worlds don't come together, because government and even the private sector is very concerned with how to manage the risks. So the mitigation risks, the adaptation risks associated with the just transition, and particularly the just energy transition. As you all know, energy is a big challenge in our country. So there's all those risks that the private sector, particularly our large companies, whether they're in mining or manufacturing or property or whatever it is, the big risks that they face in terms of their own businesses. But the second part of it is how do they contribute to making sure that as they're in their own transition plans, right, towards making their own businesses more resource efficient, whether it's from a water, from an energy, or from a waste perspective, that they're doing it in an inclusive manner. And I think this is where we try to tie the dots. And why do we do that? Because as we've been, and I've been working in the dVET systems for over 20 years, and a very strong proponent of dual VET in particular. But we know that a large majority of our young people, on the one hand, are locked out of our dVET system, or in even our post-school education system, is the one part of it, because for various reasons. So access is a big issue. But the other component of it is that the particular programs, the apprenticeship programs in our country, are very limited and very narrow, and very much geared towards these larger companies. But what we realize is that the opportunities are not in the larger companies for training and employment, because the larger companies can only absorb it and train small numbers of young people every year for their own purposes. The bigger catchment of opportunities are actually in the SMEs. And we need to be able to unlock the potential of SMEs to be able to train and employ young people. And in the context of the green transition, or the energy transition, or let's call it the green transition more broadly, the challenge is how are we going to make sure that the SMEs, the broad base of SMEs in our country, are able to get into the markets, these markets that are emerging in that transition, so that they can become viable workplaces that will train and employ young people, because that's how we're going to unlock the opportunities. So for us, a just transition is really about that linkage. And we've been working over the last few years with GIZ and SECO, I see hikers in the room, to try and test out models of dual VET that are more in tune with the needs of these SMEs. But we realize, and we knew it, but we're seeing it more emphatically, is that skills don't create jobs. So when you talk about the needs for skills, yes, skills are an important element of the just transition, but they're not enough. You have to create the jobs. You have to unlock the demand. And to unlock the demand, you have to be able to ensure that there are enough businesses that are able to access the markets that are emerging in the green transition, and that we can help those businesses to become job creators in that green transition process. So we've been working with in major industries, whether it's in manufacturing, transport and logistics, retail, construction, etc., all of which have different levels of impact in terms of the green transition, to understand what are the dynamics and understand what are the emerging trends and opportunities. Right, that's at one level. And we had something like 450 plus consultations. We set up a big panel of CEO champions from our large member companies to drive this process. And we started to understand in these various industries, what are the risks? What is it going to take for these industries to reach net zero? And to make sure that we, as a country, we can meet our targets in terms of the Paris Agreement. And what we came down to was the realization that 60% of our decarbonization can be achieved within the energy sector and within renewables. So renewables became a big hook through which we could start to build these opportunities. So drawing off that, we then start to work out now, what does it take to unlock the value of the renewables industry for just an inclusive growth? And this is now the work that we're trying to do to go one step further. So now we're saying at a macro level, the renewable industry, it has a wide value chain. What are the opportunities there? But then when you drill down below that, what are the challenges in terms of on the supply side for enterprises to be able to access those opportunities, particularly at the local level? And what does it take to unlock those markets for those SMEs? And then what does it take to now train young people and upskill the SMEs themselves and their workers, but also train young people and make them future fit so that they can benefit from the opportunities that are emerging within these SMEs as they become part of this transition process. So that's just a broad sort of picture of how we've tried to unpack it as a private sector organization, looking at the value proposition from our member companies in terms of the risks that they face, but also making sure that we're building a much more inclusive base of economic participation as we go through that transition process. I'll stop there. That was a lot.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for this dense insight. Well, I'm looking forward to talk more on the perhaps specific needs with regard to small and medium-sized enterprises and well how they can be better involved in skill development. But before I turn to Mark Hagen from the Just Transition Center at the International Trade Union Confederation, so from the industry to the union perspective. Well, so Mark, from your perspective, what opportunities, what challenges do you see in green skills development and the reskilling of workers in so-called brown sectors, and perhaps what justice aspects need to be considered in this context?
Thanks, Dirk. Thanks, everyone, for this opportunity. And thanks, Anthony, also, because I think that I can agree with many of the things that Anthony just said in terms of the challenges around employment, skill development, and transitions and transfer of workers from one industry to another industry. But maybe let me start this way around. If from a worker standpoint, from a trade union standpoint, we sort of begin our conversation about just transition from the point where we say, well, only a planned transition can be a just transition. Otherwise, it's just a transition. So it's not really, it's missing the just in the sense of justice element to it otherwise. And what we often experience is that decisions are made at political policy level or company level, sometimes sectoral, where changes occur, changes begin, markets shift massively, which we see in many industries at the moment. And all other decisions are made as a follow-up to that sort of external impetus. That's a serious problem for creating any kind of just transition. We have to be a bit more, I think, anticipatory, especially when there's a political decision to phase out coal, to phase out another industry, to phase in certain industries and support certain industries. In those cases, there's a conscious policy decision-making process there. And at that stage already, we should have input from trade unions, other civil society organizations, because in the slide that Dirk showed with the matrix of all the different interests and so on, health, social security, employment, community issues, and so on and so forth, workers and other groups are represented across all these different thematic fields, and they will be affected by the changes in all those different aspects. So one of the great challenges now in beginning the idea of a planned transition, a planned just transition, becomes doing all the very important groundwork of actually creating some kind of granular, detailed mapping of, let's say, in the skills and training field, of what skills exist among the workers, what skills exist across different parts of the workforce in terms of age groups, for example, because that's also an important aspect when you decide to also tackle the question of social protection for workers who might age out of the workforce in a transition period. And you have to care for that constituency as well. And you need to start to figure out what skills will be needed in the future in different industries, depending on what industries. And then you can hopefully create a matrix where you can see which skills, which individuals, as a matter of fact, might well be transferable. That's skill transfer, but also individual person biography, etc. transfer. There are other challenges around this issue, for example, that I'll talk about in a second. For example, geographic spatial transformation and transfer issues. Workers who work in the energy sector have very good transferability to other parts of the energy sector. So from, let's say, brown industries to renewable energy industries, there's quite a good degree of transfer intersection possibility there. But there might be geographical challenges because workers don't necessarily want to move. And all of these things, again, then also depend on, that's number two, the worker voices actually being included, the trade union workers representation being included in that planning process, in the policy, but also company policy making level. Through social dialogue, it was mentioned before, and things like binding and good faith collective bargaining. We do have collective bargaining in many instances, but sometimes not very constructive. That's not a ding on South African employees at this point. That's not, it's just a matter of practice and interest divergence between companies and workers at in some instances. But transferring workers, whether they're old, young, skilled, at various different levels, to another industry or to another job. And the question of their personal motivation for mobility is also going to always depend on the prospects in that new profession or in that new skill set, in that new job. Is that new job a good job? And if we can guarantee that, then we can also guarantee or at least give a higher level of security to individuals who would make that switch. I agree entirely with Anthony there that if there are no jobs, then what are we talking about? So that's my third point. Policy making, especially at the government level, has to be very clear and consistent to create a framework for training for the entire business environment, so that the chances can actually be given to workers at whatever age group or constituency that we speak about. If that is not the case, investment is going to be much slower than we would like to expect. We have very good examples from, at the moment, industrialized countries like Germany and the coal phase out, where we have tremendous amounts of money A, tremendous amounts of policymaking B, but difficulty in actually making coherent policy on investments to be able to promise new jobs, to be able to then track which skills do we need to plan for. And finally, I mentioned the granular skill mapping. One more thing on the VET and dVET especially. We also in the JTC typically say there's no one-size-fits-all solution for transitions of any kind. We can, and to some extent, I think that also gels well with what Anthony was saying, that different parts of the economy will be able to absorb different amounts of trainees. They will be able to offer different amounts of training slots or apprenticeships or whatever the case may be. And that also has to be mapped out. It's a lot of work, and that's one of the biggest challenges when we were talking about implementation plans and pathways into these transitions, that we get a broad headline of transition planning, and then the level of detail actually gets narrower and less specific, unfortunately, because that takes time, and it takes a tremendous amount of resources to actually then do that planning work, the mapping work for all these skills or other questions that we have to plan for. And that's where I think I would like to, and that's where I'll finish in a second, where trade unions with our members can contribute greatly, because we have the access to the individuals. The workers have huge amounts of experience and knowledge in their industries, in their fields. And as aggregators of these experiences, trade unions can contribute greatly to the knowledge base of planning for these processes, so that we can have an actual just transition rather than just a transition in that respective field.
Lots, Mark. So we talked a lot about quite some large challenges with regard to anticipation of skills needed, the involvement of SMEs, participatory policy making, consistent policy making. So the question is, how can these challenges be addressed in concrete development cooperation projects, which leads me to our last panelist, Ruly Marianti from GIZ. I'm in Indonesia. So Ruly, with your large experience in development cooperation projects on dVET, could you share with us some key learnings with regard to the processes, the mechanisms that should be in place while setting up a green skills or green jobs projects, and how did you address the just transition aspect of the issue with your project partners?
Thank you, Dirk. Our project is employment promotion project, and we focus on the renewable energy sector. So, but before we go to, I would share some experience at the project level. Please allow me to also highlight the national context a little bit, because none of the project implemented without affected by the context. One of the contexts is the implementation, how dual PT, vocational education training in Indonesia. So we know that implementation of dual dVET varies greatly across different country contexts. In Indonesia itself, a serious effort already conducted to implement to some extent, for example, implement the link and match concept since 1985. So it's almost 4 decades ago. Ministry of Education pushed forward on that with German model and experience really as the benchmark. But after the 4 decades, we have successes. We have successes, but this success still kind of highlights in kind of casuistic. So we still would like to have a breakthrough at systemic level, but we still do not have it. One of the main challenges is the capacity. That's why I'm happy to hear also inputs from Anthony. One of the main challenges is the capacity of industry associations, including here the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. The capacity is still insufficient, and some people saying that they have not the nature, a different nature to act as strong driver for involvement of private sector in dVET development. So this is one of the key challenges. Last year, the government of Indonesia issued a presidential regulations to revitalize dVET in Indonesia. And that regulations give mandate to the Indonesian chambers of commerce and industry have a greater role in dVET development. So, but we are now facing political year with ahead next year, early next year, general election. So the nation's resources and energy focus on that, but that means we still have to wait to see to what extent the impact of these regulations. Can you imagine these challenges exist in the implementation of dual dVET in the business as usual mode? We can imagine when we must implement dual dVET in the context of just transition, these are two complex processes must be facilitated at the same time. So this is, at this point, the political will of various stakeholders must be continue investing in the implementation of dual dVET must be maintained. And at this point, I'm very happy that donor coordination for dual dVET also facilitate this kind of event where we can share and learn from each other about this kind of topic, complex topic, but this is topic for all of us. So now allow me to go to the project level, how to do that at the project level. So that is the context, one of the challenge, big challenge, and now in the project level. Our project started in 2021, 3 years ago. Before that, we also already have prior a project on employment promotion, but this project focused on the green employment promotion and focus on renewable energy. So some steps need to be taken to shift from employment promotion. At the time we work with manufacturing and tourism sector to renewable energy sector, is that with this sector, it is also relatively less major sector than, for example, the manufacturing sector. We need to, in the initiation or design stage, we really need to have this conceptual positioning, clear conceptual positioning. If we look at as a project of employment promotion project, of a green job promotion project, we can apply, for example, this concept of integrated employment promotion approach, where we work with supply side, we work with demand side, and then the matching, both sides. Also Anthony mentioned that we also, skills itself will not create jobs. We have to work also at the demand side, but with project, 3 years project, limited resources, we cannot do that. It's private sector development is a project in itself. We cannot put together, and that's why in the design, we consciously purposely focus, lean more toward the supply side to the dVET aspect, skill development aspect of the employment promotion, green employment promotion project. So this is also something that we choose from the design. So this, what is the project focus, what is needed, and what is the how you call it, the available experience and expertise in the project. In the planning, the next step, when it is already designed, in the planning, it is very beneficial to align the planning, the whole project planning, with strategic priorities from government priorities, long-term development strategic planning, climate targets in Indonesia, up to even GIZ country portfolio. That is really going into the policy from BMZ, going into the green topics. So when we have this, it's like riding big wave, project on green skills, green jobs will be accepted much better when you have this alignment actually with different level of priorities. So, and then we go into the execution of the implementation stage. Here for us, we in the first step is to ensure private sector engagement. So, but we need to be flexible here. Why? Because the renewable energy industry is the condition. If we talk about skill development, the industry still in Indonesian context, still very much busy, focused on topics like it is kind of survival. It's financing on the regulations on the technical side. They are less inclined to invest in the skill development, even for their own employees. So this is also something, that's why in the previous project, we can train 2,500 people with really big investment from the industry, but not now. We have to invest more as a project on those activity because the partner contribution from the industry much less than, for example, the older or more major sector like manufacturing. So here, and we combine activities, not only skill development, but also creating conducive ecosystem and strategic collaborative partnership. So we have three different working area. First working area, field of work on private sector engagement, so really strengthening, working with private sector industry associations to develop for skill development. Second is really the training, the dVET core of the project. And the third working area is developing, together with government, developing conducive policy and regulatory framework. So here, some steps in the project implementations that are quite important for us from the design up to the implementations stage of a project. So challenge is still there. What's interesting is the government of Indonesia through the Ministry of National Planning really now focus for the long-term strategic planning, focus on development of a green economy. So for the next project, Green Jobs project, we also have like nice big wave so that we can write, because we can align with the country strategy. And that means also more resources available for from the partner side. So this is from the project side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruly, for the insights. Very interesting. We already now, well, the time planned originally is well nearly up for the panel discussion. I agreed with well, Christine, that we will have another 10 minutes. Well, a short second round with well, one more question to each of you, and please give us a precise, rather short answer. And there's also time for further discussion in the breakout groups. So, well, coming back first to Birte. Birte, you mentioned the bi and multilateral cooperation. Well, on the issue shortly, and some result from the G7 summit from I think it was last year. Well, following up on this, well, is there anything you would need, which you think needs to be improved? Any, well, expectations or wishes you might have with regard to international development cooperation, with regard to just transition and dual VAT? I mean, is there anything fine, or, well, so where do you see possibilities. So, for example, in the multilateral cooperation with regard to still improving dual VAT and the just aspects of dual VAT for a green transition.
Yes, thank you. In the interest of keeping it short, I will, I think, focus on one point here. And the point I want to make is that we observe that often there's a strong focus on the technological aspects of a just transition, meaning often our partner countries focus on new technologies, on investments in green infrastructure, etc. And sometimes they don't put as much attention to the fact that this also requires qualified personnel. So I think what we need is to strengthen the link between investments in green infrastructure with skills development. And not just in our partner countries, I can see also in our organization, in our ministry, in our political thinking, we tend to do this too. We still have these silos, I want to say. We have the energy department, we have the skills department, and we in our skills cloud, so to say, are preaching to the choir, because of course we know that skills development is very important. But what I feel we still need to put more focus on is to link the climate sphere more with the skills development sphere, and make sure that investments in infrastructure, in also development of renewable energy sector, etc., are linked, strategically linked with skills development. For example, that there is a dVET component or cooperation with a dVET project if there is projects in the renewable energy sector, etc. So these two aspects are really linked, and we don't just focus either just on skills development, because we also mentioned, I mean, this alone doesn't work. We need the jobs for it, but also it doesn't help if we invest in solar energy or water energy, and then there is no personnel for this. So we need both, and we need to also break the silos and cooperate more to bring these two spheres together and to link the infrastructure investments more strategically with skills development. This would be my brief point on this.
Thank you very much, Birte, for this short, precise, and well, interesting answer. Then coming to Anthony, you spoke about the SMEs. What role, responsibilities, generally you see for the industry sector regarding skills development, and how can SMEs perhaps be particularly supported to also offer apprenticeships, and perhaps also what potential benefits for business by engaging with skills development might be offered, and what kind of support perhaps SMEs would particularly need.
Thanks. That's a lot of questions. I'll try to be succinct. Look, I think that the reality is that it's a common challenge across the developing world, including in Indonesia and other places, that SMEs, that we have large informal sectors that are kind of locked out of many of the market opportunities that emerge. So one of the challenges we have here is that as a result of our past, we have many white-owned businesses, well-established businesses that continue to benefit from these markets and continue to occupy the space. And we're already seeing it now, for example, in the solar PV industry, which has mushroomed quite a lot this year locally, as government lifted the regulations around the threshold around the amount of power that households and other entities can produce. So we see this mushrooming of the solar PV industry, and what we're seeing increasingly is that your well-established businesses with access to capital and market penetration are jumping in and already occupying that space. and many of the SMEs, particularly in our informal sector, in our township economy, are not benefiting from those opportunities. So this is where we start to perpetuate continuous inequality and exclusion. So we've got to kind of break that mold. And I think this is a common problem in many parts of the developing world. We've got to be able to bridge that gap between your large informal economy and where the market opportunities are, right? And those market opportunities can be wide, can be anything from your domestic market to your industrial market to your commercial market, etc. We've got to be able to expand the base of opportunities within these value chains, whether it's from a manufacturing and production perspective, or whether it's from a service, provision of services, whether, our case, installation, repair, maintenance type services in the solar industry, for example. So it's very much a thing of deliberately building these linkages, these market linkages, and then making sure that these SMEs are able to respond to those. Because the challenge that you have is really that you set small businesses up to fail, because we found that, especially with your businesses in the informal economies, that they don't necessarily, they struggle to get to that point where they can become compliant, formalized, whatever it is, and really bid or access in a competitive manner those opportunities, those markets. So you need to deliberately bring those SMEs closer to where the markets are, and you need to bring the markets closer to the SMEs. And then you make sure in those SMEs, one, that they have the right, that the enterprises themselves, that they are, they have a stronger have stronger operations, that they are financially, stable, that they have, various systems and processes in place, but more importantly, that they have the skills. So whether you need to upskill the SME owner themselves, get them formally recognized, whether you have to upskill the workers in those SMEs, and whether then you have to create pathways into those SMEs for new skills. And the challenge is that SMEs don't know that they need the skills until they need the skills. Right, so often it's a bit of a chicken and egg sort of process, as I think was indicated. So you don't want to skill when in the absence of demand, but you can't always wait for the demand to manifest before you skill. So you have to kind of find this balance between the two. And I think that it's about having a deliberate strategy, doing proper planning around how these opportunities are going to manifest. I think Birte spoke about infrastructure development. We need to, when you talk about infrastructure and you talk about planning around that, how are you deliberately alongside that planning for inclusion, planning for opportunities, planning for reskilling, so that these things speak to each other, because often industrial development, infrastructure development, all of these things that aren't accompanied by a deliberate focus on inclusion. And this is why people continue to get locked out of those opportunities. You've got to be able to bring these two worlds closer together, and make sure that those opportunities are deliberately unlocked along the way.
Thanks, Anthony. Well, I look forward to discuss these issues further with you in the breakout groups. We have all panelists there. But one more question to Mark and Ruly before that. Mark, you but in your first statement, you agreed on several issues with Anthony's statement, and you were a bit critical about policy making. But so with regard to industry, I mean, is there anything you would like to be different, to improve? What do you expect from industry actors with regard to skills development? What potentially has to change from industry side, or in the context of social dialogue between the two?
I mean, the fundamental difficulty that many trade unions, many of our affiliates have on a national and sectoral level is that they are quite often not able to, either because of legal hindrances or by company interference, to actually engage as a trade union in the companies. We have tons of interference, and it's forced the ITUC to make a yearly report about this kind of problem every year, which shows where companies are and national governments are actually actively interfering in trade union activities on the ground. We can only make agreements, have social dialogue, if companies are actually letting workers organize themselves independently of management. And if that's not the case, then, well, then management is making a decision, but it's not worker-based decision-making process. So respecting worker rights on that level is step one always, because only then can you have meaningful collective bargaining and social dialogue on a sort of eye-to-eye level to then figure out what the workers need and what the companies need. I think there's total clarity on all sides that both sides have interests that they want to have respected, and that's the whole idea about actually engaging in social dialogue. If it's a one-way conversation, well, then it's not a conversation. You know, then we're not getting anywhere. Then we're back to the problem of decision-making taking place and then an information being given out. So even at the European level, for example, we have European Works Councils, and very often decisions are just, even though they have consultation and sometimes decision-making rights, information rights in the companies, they are just given information and just sort of expected just to swallow that information and then carry on with their business in that day. That's not how we can progress at any kind of speed on the matter of skill development, I think, or any kind of change process, as far as I'm concerned. And our stance is to really, if we want to drive these things forward, take, I think companies at any level should really, and I'll go back to this well again and again, really use their workers as a resource for making progress and moving forward. I saw somebody mention, you know, how can we work, find sectors. It was Michelle, as I saw, on other markets in green markets and future markets beyond renewable energy. And I think that's a very important question. Where else can we go except always the same markets? And at a European workshop, for example, trade unions from the mobility sector, meaning from industries, building cars, airplanes, and so on and so forth, and the drivers, the people who manage traffic, and so on and so forth from the transport sector, came together to talk about and find solutions and propose solutions for these questions. And they came up with a huge amount. And at first, it looks like we're talking about very top level, high level kind of proposals for the largest companies in their respective sector, but that's not really the case, because we're looking at entire supply chains, and in the supply chains, you're very quickly in the SME area, where they are also looking for this. I think that a general problem is always going to be the question of anticipating what skills we need, and I'd really like to also say, you know, obviously we don't have a crystal ball, we can't look into the future, we're not going to know exactly what the future will hold. So if we're building VET structures, VET systems, they have to be kind of resilient and flexible. I think that's part of the idea of this conversation also, to think about that side of things a bit as well. And one issue from the trade union side there would be, if we're going to make things more modular, more flexible, et cetera, there should be at the end something like a whole picture, and not a jigsaw puzzle of individual skills where pieces in the puzzle might be missing for the worker individually. So don't lose track of what the skill development is going to be like for the individual workers, whether they're being reskilled or trained for the first time in their life.
Well, thank you, Mark. I think that's was also a good basis for the further discussion with well, Anthony and the business side in the breakout group. One last very short question to Ruly and please give us a short answer. Really taking up the anticipation of of skills needed, just also mentioned in the chat. Can you? I mean, it's difficult, I know, to be brief, but could you briefly describe one or two key mechanisms that you use within your projects for the anticipation of skills needed? You're still muted, Ruly.
In our project, we do not conduct like a skill projection, like big study on skill projections, etc. But what we do before, number one activities that we do before in the first year of the project or first half year of the project is conduct two studies. It's very practical study. One study is the supply side study. What are trainings, different level of trainings available for renewable energy engineering, etc. And the other side is demand study, working with energy association, industry association from different technology of renewable energy. We conduct demand mapping. So really practical study together with companies, association, as well as individual company, looking at what skills do you need to grow further 5 years, 10 years. With them, we have this, and from both, especially from the demand study, demand side mapping, demand skill mapping, we develop training programs. First is like wish lists from training programs together with the industry. That's one. Second, we also conduct occupational mapping. Our partner in ministry asked us to do occupational map for 5 sectors from agriculture, manufacturing, but we also make one big occupational map for renewable energy that is quite complete, where the occupation identified, the competence needed identified, and whether or not already available competency standard. Based on this, the training provider can take and develop training programs, and also can be used by the private sector, the demand side, to see also those skill gaps in their company. They can look at this occupational map. But this occupational map is a living document, so we will hand it over to the government of Indonesia, Ministry of National Planning, and together with them update this document. So that is one of the mechanisms that is less expensive and large. It's smaller than really make this skill projections gradually. But in addition, we also work with the National Statistic Agency to develop also their capacity to collect data, also put some questions in the national survey on green skills and green jobs.